Welcome, students, to Unit 12, Constructivist Learning. In this unit, you will learn about constructivist learning, which is a different type of instruction from direct instruction. You'll learn when you should use it and how to teach a constructivist lesson. First of all, let's discuss the question, what is constructivism? It's when individuals discover and transform knowledge to make it their own. Learners construct their own knowledge. Thus, it comes from the word construct. Constructivist approaches emphasize cooperative learning, discussion, questioning, and other metacognitive skills. So whereas in a direct instruction lesson, you'll see more lecture, in a constructivist lesson, you'll see more engaging activities, such as the ones I just mentioned and more. Sometimes you might hear about discovery learning, which is a constructivist approach to teaching in which students are encouraged to learn principles for themselves. It's important to realize that constructivism is not a theory. We've discussed a lot of theories in this class. For example, we discussed Erikson's social-emotional learning theory. We discussed Piaget's cognitive theory. We've discussed many theories. This is a teaching approach grounded in some of those theories. What's the difference between direct instruction and constructivist learning? One big difference is that in direct instruction, you tell students the answers to the questions raised by the learning objectives, and in constructivist instruction, you don't. For example, if you were teaching the area of a rectangle and you were using a direct instruction lesson, you will teach area equals length times width. You might write that equation on the board. You are directly giving the students the information. However, in a constructivist lesson, you would not do that. You might challenge them by providing shapes and manipulatives and asking them, the students, to determine the formula for area. Constructivism has many historical roots. In the history of education, it draws heavily on the work of John Dewey, Jean Piaget, and Lev Vygotsky, all of whom emphasize that cognitive change takes place only when students explore their environment and reflect upon this interaction. Again, it differs from direct instruction because you do not simply tell the student everything they need to know. You will tell them some things, though, and that will become clearer in a moment. When you think of the traditional classroom, you are probably thinking about direct instructions. You'll recall from last week that we learned that in direct instruction, students receive knowledge from teaching and from reading text. Direct instruction emphasizes basic skills. Usually there is a strict adherence to a fixed curriculum with textbooks and workbooks. Instructor gives the information and students receive the information. This is sometimes called the sage on the stage model. In direct instruction, the instructor assumes the directive, authoritative role. There's assessment via testing with an emphasis on correct answers, and students frequently work individually. Frequently, these are the conditions seen in a direct instruction lesson, although that may vary slightly. What does a constructivist classroom look like? What methods are used? First, we know that students construct their knowledge based on experiences. So, this approach emphasizes complex thinking. Many times you might see the use of primary sources and manipulatives. It's important to remember, however, that the hands-on lesson is not always a constructivist lesson. If you directly teach and give the information to the students, even if you are using a hands-on approach, that would be a direct instruction lesson. So the key question you have to ask yourself to determine whether a lesson is constructivist or direct in nature is the following. Is the teacher giving the information to the students, or are they discovering the information for themselves? In a constructivist classroom, students interact more with each other, and the teacher becomes the guide on the side as opposed to the sage on the stage. This guide on the side approach means that the teacher is arranging activities from which the students will learn and then guiding them through the activities. She is not providing direct information to the students about the learning objective. The instructor therefore interacts and negotiates with students. You will see more of a focus on assessment of performance tasks, on doing things and portfolios, and students work more often in groups. Let's discuss the role of teachers in the constructivist classroom a little more in depth. The teacher's role is to model and coach, to show them how to do things. We call this behavioral modeling. There's another type of modeling that's used called cognitive modeling, which is when teachers show students how to think about things. The teacher also diagnoses difficulties. The teacher might be walking around the room, interacting with groups of students, and providing feedback in order to help them progress. The teacher's role is also to design and scaffold students through activities. The teacher sets up and implements appropriate learning activities that will allow students to discover ideas. Then the teacher will guide the students step by step until they complete the task and learn the material. What types of methods might you see in a constructivist lesson? You might see real-world activities like the stock market. You might see students completing skits or simulations. You might have heard of problem-based learning, in which students try to solve a real-world problem. Inquiry methods are very popular in science and social studies. Cooperative learning is popular in all subjects. Other methods include role-playing, debates, research, field trips, experiments, and investigations, using manipulatives to discover things. Again, though, recall that just because something is hands-on doesn't make it constructivist learning. What is appropriate for constructivist learning? What types of activities or lessons are appropriate for constructivist learning? Lessons that have messy content. What does that mean? These lessons are appropriate for constructivist learning. Messy content means there's no clear-cut answer. Consider the following. Suppose you had to teach a lesson on the periodic table of chemical elements. That is not messy content. Clearly, for each element, there is a symbol, there's a number of protons, electrons, neutrons, and that can all be memorized. That's not what we consider messy content. However, suppose you had to teach students to understand the causes of climate change. That would be messy content because there are no clear-cut answers. That's rich and complex. So another area that's appropriate for constructivist learning is complex thinking. Content or skills that students can figure out on their own in a reasonable amount of time is also appropriate for constructivist learning. If students can research the life of an author, that's doable. That may be appropriate for constructivist learning. If you think about a lesson that might not be appropriate for constructivist learning in terms of how long it might take to figure out, that might be the Pythagorean theorem. Some examples of things that might be appropriate for constructivist learning: calculating the area of a rectangle, fractions and how they work, structures of a poem, causes of war, etc. All of these are a little bit messy. Students can figure them out in a reasonable amount of time, and they emphasize complex thinking. Let's look at some examples of constructivist learning. One example might be when students participate in a science lab to determine what makes leaves turn colors in the fall. Students conduct research and draw a timeline of the rise of Chinese civilization. Students study the life of a famous author and put together a poster presentation on the author. Notice that in all of these examples, the teacher arranges activities, the students do the activities and learn from the activities. The teacher does not directly teach the students the information. Other examples of constructivist learning are shown on this slide. Students play with manipulatives to understand fractions better. Students look at works of Impressionism and try to determine what elements they all have in common. Students go on to create their own impressionistic art. How is a constructivist lesson taught? There are 5 steps that we're going to use in order to learn how a constructivist lesson is taught. We'll discuss each of these steps in more depth. Step 1 is to come up with a topic and a question. The topic or question should be something inherently interesting and personal. Let's follow an example through. Let's say you're an ELA teacher and you want to teach students about favorite authors. The question might be, who is your favorite author? Why does he or she mean something in your life? The purpose of this unit would be to challenge students to think about the types of authors they like and why they like those authors. Step 2 is develop a learning objective. SWBAT simply means students will be able to. The objective should focus on what you want students to be able to know or do at the end of the instruction. Here, our examples learning objective would be students will be able to conduct an analysis of their favorite author in terms of his or her body of work, perspective, and evolution of writing style. Notice how the objective is related to the topic or question. Step 3 is to design the learning activities. Here is a description of the activities in our example. Students research their favorite author and complete a list of questions on a worksheet. They read at least 3 different works from 3 different time periods of the author's body of work. They analyze these 3 pieces using a worksheet you give them. They prepare a poster presentation using specific criteria you provide. Notice that in this lesson, the teacher never provides the information directly about the author. It is up to the students to research and come up with the information. However, the teacher does create worksheets to guide the students' discovery process. Step 4 is to scaffold and guide to provide just-in-time knowledge. We've seen that word scaffold before. It means to support learning. Just-in-time knowledge is knowledge that the teacher is providing just in time when the students need it. It is not knowledge about the learning objective. It is not knowledge in this example about the student's favorite author. Instead, the students might need to be taught how to research. So here is an example of just-in-time knowledge. While students are reading their author's works, you provide a mini lesson on perspective and ask them to complete a worksheet on author's perspective. Or, before students can begin their research, you provide a mini lesson on effective internet searches and how to distinguish between good and poor websites. Notice here that both mini lessons support the students so that they can complete the activities to gather the information about the objective. These lessons do not directly teach the objective. Rather, they support the learning activities so that students can complete the activities. Step 5 is to assess learning. In this example, students will complete a poster on the life of their favorite author. The poster might be assessed using a rubric. Frequently, assessments for constructivist lessons are not simply tests. They're projects, they're posters, etc. Let's look at some other examples from other areas. Step 1 was start with one or more questions. Step 2 is add a learning objective. Suppose in science we wanted to know, is trash a problem in the United States? The matching objective might be, students will be able to analyze trash production in the United States, explain why it is a problem, and provide practical suggestions for reducing it. Example 2 comes from math. The question might be, why do we need to calculate the volume of shapes? This is a good example of when you might provide a student a reason why do we have to learn this. The matching objective might be, students will be able to calculate the volume of a container and apply this calculation to make a decision about how much the container can hold. Example 3 comes from social studies. Why do people go to war? The example question was, why do people go to war? The objective might be, using primary sources, students will be able to critically analyze the reasons for the Civil War. Example 4 is similar to our previous example. Why do readers prefer certain authors and not others? Which authors do students prefer and why? And the matching objective might be, students conduct an analysis of their favorite author in terms of their body of work, perspective, and evolution of writing style. Here is a summary of this lecture. Constructivist instruction is when teachers arrange activities and students construct their own knowledge through these activities. The teacher functions as a guide on the side. Messy or complex information is most appropriate for constructivist instruction. The 5 steps to teach a constructivist lesson are: focus on a topic or question you want to explore. It should be interesting and personal. State the learning objective. Develop learning activities. Scaffold and guide students to provide just-in-time knowledge, and assess student learning. I hope this lesson has given you more information about constructivist instruction. Thank you.